Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our toolbox session this morning. We'll go ahead and wait a moment or two as people join the webinar this morning, but thanks for spending your Friday with us. While we're waiting, I'll ask Michaela to go ahead and launch a quick poll. So this is just a couple of questions about where you're coming from and what sector you work in. So this information is just really helpful for us when we're planning our webinars to know who's coming and what we can be planning for in the future. So thank you for filling that out. And we'll go ahead and get started in just a minute. Morning, and if you're just joining us, we just have a couple of poll questions for you and we'll be getting started in just a moment. All right, we can go ahead and stop the poll now and we'll go ahead and get started. So once again, welcome and thank you for joining us today at our Toolbox Greener for All, Reimagining Access to Parks webinar. I did wear green for this webinar, so really excited about the program we have today. I'm Katie Enders. I'm an associate planner at Puget Sound Regional Council. I'm joined by one of my colleagues, Erica, today, and then we have some great guests from the Trust for Public Land, Parks Tacoma, and the City of Renton with us this morning. So really excited about what we've got going on today. A little bit about the Toolbox series before we dive in. This is a quarterly webinar series, and really the idea here is we want to give planners another tool in your toolbox. We're looking at best practices and resources, really focused on local planning in these conversations. And if you have any work going on at your jurisdiction, in your region that you're interested in sharing with us, you can definitely reach out to me and maybe we'll get you on the next toolbox session. But maybe not, because actually that one is already planned. So I'll be sharing a link in the chat about that. I did want to announce that June 26th, mark your calendars, we'll be hosting a toolbox session that's really focused on local approaches to housing and supportive services. So registration is already open for that webinar. Once I'm done here in a little bit, I will share a link for you to register there. And wanted to go over a couple of logistics before we dive into our program today. You'll notice that you don't have a chat function since this is a webinar, but you do have a Q&A box. And so we really encourage you to use that Q&A throughout the webinar. We do have about 10 minutes set aside at the end of the session for a live Q&A, but throughout the session, the panelists may be able to type out some answers to some of the questions. So feel free to submit them as you think of them, and we'll do our best to answer those. We also got some great Q&As when you registered for the webinar. So we've done our best to integrate some of the answers to those questions you had through the presentation. If you are in the market for AICP credit, you will be eligible to claim one of those. So I'll have more information at the end of the session about that. And then we also have a session evaluation and a Title VI survey at the end of the session. So if you're able to fill those out, those are really helpful for us. There's some session resources that we've put together. This is already posted on PSRC's website, but I'll also drop a link in the chat for you. So the resource sheet that's posted will have links to all of the resources being discussed by our panelists. And then there's also some additional links if you want to use this as a diving board to dive deeper into the topic. Some great resources to get you started there. Finally, we are recording today's session, so that will be posted within a week or two. We'll get that recording out to everybody that registered, and we'll also be sharing the presentations after the session. So diving into today's program, the great news is you're already almost through the welcome and introductions. So very shortly, I'll be turning things over to my colleague, Erica Harris, to talk about PSRC's open space plan. After that, like I mentioned, we're joined by a couple of staff from the Trust for Public Land. So we have Sam Savin, Sarnisha Evans, and Alfonso Orozco. So the three of them are kind of interspersed throughout the presentation to talk about some of the resources and work that Trust for Public Land is doing. We're also joined by Aaron Irby with Parks Tacoma and Jesse Kotarski and Paul Hintz with the City of Renton. So we'll be hearing about a couple of local examples. After that, like I mentioned, we'll have about 10 minutes for Q&A, and then we'll start to wrap up around 11:25 so we can be sure that you're done and on with the rest of your day by 11:30. So once again, thanks so much for joining us, and I will be turning it over to Erica. Oops.
Thank you, Katie. It looks like you're sharing the screen. So if you could move up to the very first slide, should have a pretty picture of the region. There we go. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I'm gonna stop and reshare because it's doing something very strange. I don't know what's happening, so
okay.
Me, but give me just
do you want me to share it?
Maybe, why don't you do that? Thank you.
Okay, no problem.
I thought I had it all ready and it worked okay for my slides, but okay, thanks so much, Erica.
That's okay. And you're seeing the full screen now?
Yep.
Okay. Well, it might be doing it to me too, but we'll see. I'm really happy to be sharing a bit about our Regional Open Space Conservation Plan update. But first, I wanted to appreciate our other presenters. They're bringing their expertise and innovative strategies for improving access to parks, and I just really appreciate them and excited to see what they have to share. Vision 2050 recognizes that access to parks is crucially important to our region's quality of life and to getting our regional growth strategy working. And it does have a multi-county planning policy on providing walkable access to parks and trails and prioritizing historically underserved communities. We've also seen these reflected in local comprehensive plans from around the region. Now, a bit about our Regional Open Space Conservation Plan. We're defining open space broadly as urban parks and open space, regional trails, farmland, working forests, aquatic systems, and natural lands. And there's a link at the bottom there if you want to take a look at the plan. But you can see the map of the open space network on the right. The parks are fairly small compared to some of the other lands like national forests and parks, but very crucial parts of that. So the plan looks at which lands in the open space network are conserved in the long term, so are owned for public by the public for conservation or have conservation easements, and which are at risk and we consider conservation needs. I won't rattle off all the numbers there on the left, but we do have some work to do. We did take a look at regional trails and parks a little differently because we wanted to really identify access issues to parks and trails and where the gaps are there. So the map on the right is our conservation needs. We were able to update our plan or take a snapshot, I guess, of how we're doing with our plan goals in 2024. And we did update our methodology for parks and open space and started using the Trust for Public Lands ParkServe. And I won't get into that too much because you'll hear more about that from TPL, but wanted to share kind of our regional look at it. And you can see the map on the right of our region with the parks and also the priority areas per new parks with those darkest purple being the highest priorities. We had an audacious goal in the open space plan to, by 2050, have all urban residents live within a 10-minute walk of a park. And in 2024, through ParkServe, we found that 72% of the urban population lives within a 10-minute walk of a park. And we were also able to see how the cities in our region stack up and doing fairly well, with 22 cities having more than 90% of their population within walking distance of a park, On the other hand, there are 6 cities that have less than 50% of their population within walking access to a park. So some work to do there, but I'm really happy to have this information. Regional trails are important to help connect parks, and we did have a goal in the open space plan to add 300 miles of trails to the trail network. That's kind of closing park gaps and extending trails where they're planned. The map on the right, you can see the improvements that happened since 2018 when our open space plan was issued. So those are those bright blue lines. And I highlighted a few projects, one from each county, but there are many, many projects from around the region. In King County, the Mountains to Sound Greenway Trail was extended. The Sound to Olympics Trail, their first segment there in Kitsap County, was added. The Pipeline Trail was extended in Pierce County, and the White Horse Trail in Snohomish County was also extended. So some great work throughout the region on trails, and we found that about 30 miles of trails were added since 2018. A little bit about our engagement on the plan. I'd love to hear from any of you who have thoughts about the open space plan. I'm happy to talk. We are going to be talking with our boards and committees at PSRC. County staff are incredibly important, and we coordinate closely with them. We're forming, just like the 2018 plan, an advisory committee, and we've got some great folks on that. And of course, tribes are important. They're also on our advisory committee. PSRC convenes an Environmental Resource Agency coordination group, and that group will be taking a look at the plan and providing input. Hopefully we can talk to our countywide planning groups. So if any of you are in those groups, please let me know. And we're working with many, many more partners, including land conservancies and local integrating organizations. So these are just a few that we're working with. And again, happy to talk to anyone who has thoughts or questions. So we're now in the scoping phase of the plan update. We'll soon be moving on to data analysis and plan development with hopes of having a draft plan for review at the end of this year and to finalize the plan in the first quarter of next year. And that's an important timeline because we're already looking at updating our regional plan, Vision 2050, and this will provide important input into that planning process. So that's what I have for you for the open space plan. Again, happy to answer questions later. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Erica. Appreciate it. And we'll go ahead and share the screen for our next presentation. And I think Sam will be coming on to kick us off.
Yes, thank you, Katie, and thank you everyone for joining today. My name is Sam Savin. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm here on behalf of Trust for Public Land with a few other colleagues who will present after me. I just first want to thank Katie and the Regional Council for giving us some space to present about our work. I'm really, really excited. So next slide. Just as a little bit of background about Trust for Public Land, we're a national nonprofit that is focused on connecting everyone to the outdoors. We've been around for 50 years, 52 years, I think now maybe. We have offices in somewhere between 25 to 30 states, depending on how you count it. Next slide. We do the work that we do because we know that outdoors is more important than just a nice to have. Outdoor access is more than just a nice to have. It's really essential for community well-being. I'll share a few more data points on each of these in a minute or two here, but we know that communities with good outdoor access are healthier, they're more climate resilient, and they provide more space for connection between residents, which is so important, especially in the divided climate we live in today. Next slide. And we do a lot of different things at TPL. I'm really going to be talking about the technical assistance work that we provide, and Alfonso and Cernisha will talk about some of the other work we do, but we do a lot of different things from large-scale land conservation, things like acquiring land near national parks and transferring that into the national park systems to building schoolyards that are open to the public and parks and communities across the country. And then we also have a few teams that are really focused on helping communities build their own capacity for parks and green space work. So we help communities build tools, generate evidence, learn from peers, build the funding stacks that they might need for their parks work. So we both do the work, conserving land and building parks, and then help communities build their capacity to do the work themselves. Next slide. And I shared a little bit about this, but just to give a little bit more of an example or two, we know that parks make places better to live in. And I'll share the links to each of these in the chat once I'm done with my presentation. But we know that parks can spur physical activity, which can reduce the risk of chronic disease. It also has lots of benefits for mental health. We know that communities that are close to parks tend to be cooler than communities that are not close to parks. We know that parks are a great place to facilitate social interactions and build connections with neighbors. I know that it's a place where I meet a lot of people and build relationships and friendships, which is so important in these days. And then finally, we also know that parks can really be an economic engine for communities and drive economic development and improve quality of life. Next slide. In spite of that, we know that 100 million people in the US don't have a park within a 10-minute walk of home. We know that parks in neighborhoods of color and in low-income neighborhoods are smaller but relied on to serve more people. That's just looking at access. If you think about quality, whether these parks are in good physical condition, whether they have programming that's relevant to the people who live by them, you can imagine that that 100 million number is actually exponentially larger. We know growth patterns across the US today. 65, most of the largest cities in the country have less park space per person than they did 10 years ago. So next slide. There's, in my mind, maybe 6 challenges that a lot of communities are facing across the country that we hear about when we talk to them about their parks work. Just first, parks are underfunded, especially I think for local governments. Decision makers are forced to make hard decisions about where spending goes, and we know that parks are generally one of the first items to get cut when budgets get hard, and one of the last items to come back when revenue becomes available. We also know there are significant land use challenges. Built-up cities might not have space to add parkland or might not know how to activate some of the land that's hiding in plain sight, and that I think Sarnisha is going to talk a little bit more about later today. And kind of on the flip side of that land use equation, we also know that there are cities that don't have as many people as they used to and may have built a park system for a city that has a population of 1 million, but now has a population of half that, so they have more park space than they can manage. This maintenance point is really tied to the first point, but maintenance in particular, I think my job is talking to cities about their park system. Every city that I talk to talks about maintenance being a challenge, and that ultimately is, in my opinion, a downstream effect of underfunding of maintenance. We also know that cities don't necessarily have the data that they need to manage the parks in the way that they would like. Lots of cities don't have asset management systems for tracking park conditions, for tracking park improvements, for making decisions about where they should invest in parks. And then finally, we hear in a lot of places that community members aren't involved in the decision-making process about what their parks look like and how they are activated. Next slide. So TPL has established the 10-minute walk program to help address those challenges. And I'll kind of talk through this slide from left to right, but this program was established to help cities think through how they can use policy and systems change to address these challenges. I'm using cities as kind of a catch-all term here, but I think we've worked with communities of all sizes, from cities to towns to counties. So just first on the far left here, we partnered with the College of Charleston a couple of years ago to identify the most prevalent policies that are shaping park access and quality across the country. And that's really the bedrock of our work. So the research we conduct, the recommendations that we share, the tools we develop are really rooted in rigorous evidence base. We provide 3 programs to help cities tap into that evidence. We have a community of practice, which I'll talk about more in a minute, that provides space for cities to learn from one another and from experts about the emerging and best practices related to park management and creation across the country. I'll drop a link to that. It's a free ongoing webinar series that you all can join. I'll drop a link to that in the chat after I'm done presenting here. We have some technical assistance and tools that are available to cities. Those are normally kind of built custom one-off solutions. And then we have our Park Equity Accelerator, which I'll also talk more about in a minute here, but that's sort of our signature, most in-depth technical assistance program that our team offers. And then we're really interested in scale. Like I was saying on the last slide, most of these challenges are present in most cities that I talk to, if not all cities. So we try to create these tools and resources and educational materials and use partnerships, communications, and public affairs to share out those resources, whether it's through blog posts or conference presentations, lots of different approaches there. So next slide, I'm going to talk here for a couple minutes about the community of practice. So COP really has 3 goals. The first is to explore the high impact issues that are shaping park equity. So we create cohorts that are organized around different topics and that allow for us to have targeted conversations around specific barriers and opportunities. So for example, we've had cohorts focus on parks and economic vitality, parks and affordable housing, park quality. The second goal is to learn together in a really collaborative way. So just for example, we're running a place-based cohort right now in the Central Valley of California, where we are supporting local community-based organizations and governments to understand the landscape of funding for parks in the Central Valley, what outdoor access looks like in the Central Valley, what community needs are in the region. And through those sessions, we're able to curate panels that highlight local inspiring examples, elevate key data that might be necessary for decision-making, and strategies that are emerging across the region and could be spread from pocket of the region to pocket of the region. And then finally, we really see these communities of practice as a place for people to connect with their peers. So just coming back to that example of Central Valley, California, we've really seen how there's a huge ecosystem of stakeholders there, but it's very fragmented. So we are doing these facilitated group discussions and informal touch points for the community of practice, which provides time for peer exchange so that people can learn from one another and build those connections that are so important to this work. Next slide. So just this is a quick example of what the COP has looked like over the past 5 years. So we started with 1 track in 2021. Now we're currently running 7 tracks. I think what might be particularly interesting to this group are a track that we're running right now called Crossing Sectors that's looking at privately and municipally owned lands to identify opportunities to transform them into parks, green space, and open space. So we're thinking about things like tactical urbanism, which we have a great example last week from Salt Lake City about activating a highway underpass, thinking about things like activating cemeteries as passive and active green space. Another track here that I think might be of interest to this group is our parks programming track, which is really focused on tactical and practical strategies that practitioners can get rolling on immediately to increase park programming. So we focused on things like how to improve recruitment strategy for rec programs, cost-effective mobile recreation pilots, and many other topics. So next slide. So just over the past 5 years, just to give an idea of the scale of the community of practice, Since we launched, we've engaged over 1,000 practitioners across 250 communities across the country, created 20 cohorts organized by different themes, regions, and partnerships. We produced multiple resources that respond to the challenges and needs of those cohorts, including a quick start guide for community forests, and a policy report on parkland dedication ordinances and impact fees. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to talk here about a little bit Park Equity Accelerator, which is another one of those boxes on that row of boxes slide I shared. But the accelerator launched in 2022 is a cohort-based technical assistance program through which we help communities increase park access and park quality by using tools from the world of policy and systems change. So just to kind of compare it to the COP, talk about how those two pieces interlock with one another. COP is like very top of the funnel awareness building. The PEA is providing more specific individualized projects with specific communities, hand-in-hand support. Through the PEA, we provide local communities with case-making materials and tools that they need to advance their parks work. We provide them with training, we get them connected to TPL experts, and we help them build the political will to increase access to parks and green space. Since we launched the accelerator in 2022, we have implemented it in 21 cities and worked with over 250 people. Next slide. So the goals of the PEA, there's three. The first two are kind of two sides of the same coin. So as I suggested earlier in my presentation, I know a lot of cities have the same challenges when it comes to their parks work, maintenance, funding, land use. So what we're trying to do through the accelerator is work with an individual city to address that challenge, and then through that process, build best practices, case studies, insights, etc., that can be used by other cities who are facing similar challenges. So the idea being that if we can help Washington, D.C. a little bit move the needle on its maintenance work, can that provide a model for other communities across the country? And then the third piece here, just always trying to figure out a way to bring community into the parks decision-making process a little bit more. So next slide. Just talking a little bit about how we do that work. I think there's 6 main things that show up in the accelerator. Try and do community engagement to understand what the big issues are in a community. We do research and analysis to surface best practices that communities can be doing. We build tools. We provide training support. We conduct pilot projects to help make the case for permanent change. I could probably talk about this slide on its own just for an hour, but for the sake of time, I will keep us moving to the next slide. I could talk about successes and lessons learned from each of the 21 cities we've worked with here, but a few wins that I'm particularly excited about here. We worked with Boston Housing Authority to help develop a new strategy for improving its on-site open space. BHA has now allocated 1% of its capital budget for open space improvements, which we see as a huge win. In Pittsburgh, we helped the city figure out where thousands of parcels are that could be brought under public ownership, which they are now in the process of doing. We also made stewardship a little bit easier for residents there, got them to move from like a legalese waiver to get people to volunteer in parks to just a simple online form. In Scranton, we conducted a walk audit to identify which sections of the city have the most challenges in physically walking, biking, and rolling to parks. That audit, the city credits as helping them gain $1 million of funding to make improvements to their rights of way. And there are a few other communities across Pennsylvania that are now implementing that walk audit methodology, which is a great example of how we can get to scale. And then DC, we were really focused on maintenance there, and we have helped the city test out a new approach for data collection and response to that data collection, and the maintenance practices that respond to that data collection, basically. That has now been implemented as a standard practice in the district, And we have really seen some strong examples of how that is leading to district improving its maintenance practices. And next slide here, this is the last slide. Uh, there were a few questions that we got ahead of time that I just want to respond to. How are communities using, or what metrics are communities using to measure access to parks? These are submitted questions from before the webinar. Most cities are using 10-minute walk as standard for park access. We saw that in the presentation given just a few minutes earlier, thinking about that 100% walk access for the Puget Sound region. Acres per capita is a common way of measuring access as well. And then I think there's also an emerging trend of measuring access to different amenity types or experience types, as I call it. So making sure that, people might have access to 2 or 3 parks nearby, but maybe all 3 of those parks only have playgrounds, which means that that person doesn't really get to experience a more natural setting, trees, gardens, etc. So there are some cities that are trying to figure out how to categorize different park experiences and measure access for residents based on that. Portland, Oregon is as good as anyone about that, and I know they're not too far away from you. There's a question about how to make streets in urban areas have more greenery. I think street trees are, well, maybe not are, but can be a relatively easy win there, including developer requirements or incentives for street trees. There's other ways to green the rights of way too, including stormwater infrastructure that can provide green infrastructure and also rainwater relief. There's privately owned public space can be a strategy for increasing greenery. We have a link to a recent community of practice session on non-traditional lands that I'll drop this link in along with a few other after my talk that might be interesting. Finally, there's this question of real or perceived safety concerns. This is a really good question. I'm not going to pretend like I have an answer to it. I think my perspective is that one of the things that places can do to address safety concerns is get more people in the park, which might seem counterintuitive, just kind of from like an eyes on the street perspective. If you have people in the park using the park in pro-social ways, then you might be less likely to see people using the park in anti-social ways. So we see programming as a big part of that picture. And again, have some recordings from recent community of practice that can provide some ideas, which I will drop in the chat here. Those are the end of my slides. Thank you again for the presentation time. Just really enjoyed getting to talk to you all and looking forward to the discussion and conversation throughout the rest of our time here. And with that, I think I will pass it to Sarnisha to talk a little bit about some of our work.
Perfect. Thank you, Sam. And again, I'm Sarnisha Evans. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Washington Parks for People Program Director at the Trust for Public Land, and very excited to be co-presenting with the team from Parks Tacoma, and really excited to dive into much of the work we're able to just see happen, and based on Sam's technical assistance and just a huge number of partnerships throughout Tacoma. So I'll pass it to Erin.
Good morning, everyone. I am likewise very thrilled to be here with Cernisha and the team from Trust for Public Land. And my role as a capital project administrator at Parks Tacoma, I lead the planning, design, and construction of mostly community and neighborhood parks and community centers within our park district. So really excited to dive into the ways that Trust for Public Land helps us to lead analysis and expand access equitably in Tacoma. And we can go to the next slide. Before we dive into the projects and programs with Trust for Public Land, I just want to take a step back. The Metropolitan Park District of Tacoma was established in 1907. We were a real early adapter when the state law allowed for independent park districts. We are the oldest incorporated independent park district in Washington State. Within our district, we manage over 2,900 acres of parks, open space, community centers, spray grounds, pools, sports fields. We have a zoo and aquarium, marina, waterfront properties, a public golf course, and historic attractions within our system. So there's a lot that we do as part of Parks Tacoma. We are also We operate under an elected 5-member board of commissioners, and they serve staggered 6-year terms. So just a little bit about our governance structure that informs the work that we do. And now I will hand it to Sarnisha, who will talk about the many ways that Trust for Public Land is providing support for Parks Tacoma to help expand access to park facilities across the district, and how we're working with our many partner agencies like the City of Tacoma to expand park access equitably. So thanks, and I'll let you take it from here, Sarnisha.
Great. Thank you, Erin. And so Sam mentioned this not too long ago, but TPL has a great not only Park Equity Accelerator program, but just an opportunity to provide technical assistance to many of our park partners. So I'm very excited to know and be able to share that as a part of the third cohort of the Accelerator program, we had 2 Washington-based teams join, one from King County Parks, and I will share a bit more about the Tacoma working teams. And before we move on to the next slide, just scanning the list of participants, very excited to see that we have someone from both King County Parks and the Tacoma Accelerator team on the call and on the webinar. So excited to know that this work extends well beyond just this space, but well into our communities throughout the region. All right, next slide, please. Okay, I wanted to just spend a bit of time elevating our work in Tacoma, and that the Tacoma team was focused primarily on creating safe community connections throughout Tacoma. And so thinking through greenways and opportunities to increase access and movement throughout the city, when also trying to pair it in the need for just more vegetation, greenery, and just making it much easier for Tacoma residents, our neighbors, to move pretty seamlessly throughout the city. And so that being the focus, and often tied to, in both in this case and other accelerator programs, tied to Parks Tacoma strategic plan. And so the partners are part of this Tacoma program were, again, a team from Parks Tacoma, as well as a few individuals from the City of Tacoma, including Transportation Division and their environmental services, which includes the urban forestry and stormwater team members. And so as a part of this accelerator, each team has a different set of deliverables. And so the Tacoma team was interested in really policy recommendations, models, examples from across the country that could help to inform this want to increase connectivity. And so there have been, in addition to the deliverables, about 2 other strong outcomes. We've been able to work a bit more closely with the Tacoma team on a set of pilot projects, and I'll talk about that a bit more in the next slide. And then we've also been invited to join and be loosely a part of the conversations that both Parks Tacoma and the City of Tacoma is having as they update their 10-year interlocal agreement. Next slide. So Erin and I will be spending just a bit of time elevating the pilot project. And so Sam didn't touch on this, but as a part of the accelerator, we've been able to loop in one of our colleagues on our GIS team to essentially create a GIS tool that overlays using data from both Parks Tacoma and multiple divisions throughout the City of Tacoma to think through and be able to have a visual of park and city priorities to not only support future decision-making, joint investments, but just ultimately to understand where there are upcoming projects and opportunities to leverage, again, resources, community engagement opportunities, and potentially funding. And then tied to this GIS tool, TPL has been able to provide a mini grant to a local Tacoma organization, in this case, Tacoma on the Go, and very excited that they will soon be leading a series of community engagement events in partnership with a smaller grassroots organization, along with some community walks, potentially bike rides, and just wanting to be a presence in several community events that will allow them, both members of Tacoma on the Go, Parks Tacoma, and a few team members from the city, to elevate the upcoming projects and gather additional feedback in support of projects in and around Ryan's Park. And so I'll pass the next slide over to Erin.
Great. Thanks, Sarnisha. We are highlighting this example park at Ryan's Park based on some questions that we received beforehand about increasing park access without increasing parking, also providing connections to active transportation. So a little bit about Ryan's Park. It's in our South End neighborhood, specifically in the Fern Hill community. These are both areas of focus for Parks Tacoma and the City of Tacoma. It's a historically underserved area that we are really prioritizing having capital improvements and investments. And At Ryan's Park, you can see in the image on the left, there's a large hill and a wetland area that connects to a main throughway in the park. And so our park project, the Parks Tacoma, is focusing on expanding access and a throughway with a pedestrian bridge and improved sidewalk access, site furnishings, and increasing usability with better sign design. At the same time, the City of Tacoma is addressing safe routes to schools and a nearby middle school and elementary school. And in their transportation and mobility plan, there's a future active transportation corridor and the adjacent Park Avenue. So this is a way for us all to come together to maximize capital investments in a priority area that we have discussed and seen through a lot of mapping and analysis, and an important part of Tacoma. It's worth noting that this, I'll talk a little bit about it later. This project is currently in design and is also featured in our upcoming 2026 bond package to provide that permanent bridge to ensure year-round access from the Park Avenue entrance. So, and I will hand it back to Sarnisha to talk a little bit more about another way that Trust for Public Land is supporting Parks Tacoma.
Perfect. And Erin, thank you for queuing it up. One of the many ways that TPL's been able to provide technical assistance, in addition to the accelerator program, GIS mapping, I mean, I could go on and on. TPL also has a conservation finance team. And so that team is really tasked with supporting not only local jurisdictions, but state entities with thinking through ballot measures and public funding opportunities that will increase funding and policy to increase access to parks, trails, schoolyards, just any green space. And to some points that Sam made earlier, there's often a need for funding as we think about ongoing maintenance and renovation. And in many of our communities, we're seeing a want for density. And so wanting to balance the need for parks and green spaces with a huge number of needs, but making sure that there's funding for that. So the conservation team links primarily into that work, and they provide a wide breadth and depth of support, all depending on the needs of the jurisdiction. So that could include feasibility research, working closely with consultants to lean into some public opinion surveys, some technical assistance and conversations around ballot measure design, get out to vote campaigns. I would say, again, all depending on the needs of the jurisdiction, the support looks very differently. And in the case of Tacoma, we've been very excited to work closely with the Parks Tacoma team, consultants, volunteers, and along with the campaign team to support their upcoming bond measure. So next slide, please.
All right. I will clarify now that as a Parks Tacoma staff member, I did not participate in any of the measures that Sarnisha just mentioned, and that I am not supporting or opposing this upcoming ballot measure, but I am sharing the slides. The subsequent slides are slides from our Facts and Information program about the 2026 park bond. And this is identical to what we're sharing with the public and our local community about how the bond was shaped and the decision-making processes that guided the ultimate 2026 bond. So the 2026 bond was shaped from more than a year of internal analysis of needs. So looking at all of the parks across our system, all the zoo, the Northwest Trek, all of those historic attractions that I mentioned, the over 2,900 acres within our park district, and looking at all of the needs from our asset management perspective and prioritization and within our district. We assembled a Park Bond Advisory Committee to help us clarify from our staff internal analysis. And that advisory committee was integral to the shaping of the 2026 bond. This consisted of 28 community members from across the city, from our parks advisory councils focused on either arts and heritage or nature and science, representatives from other local governments at our partner agencies, nonprofits, businesses, user groups, and we even had a high schooler from our local Science and Math Institute who provided the youth perspective in our planning process. Next slide, please. That advisory committee gave us really important recommendations to shape this 2026 bond. One of them, most importantly, is that there's no tax increase. We are keeping the tax rate at the same rate given the economic uncertainty and current climate. They also really noted to have equitable investments across Tacoma, not just in certain neighborhoods. They also highlighted the importance of certain project categories, highlighting neighborhood identity and the connection that folks have to their nearby local parks. And as you'll see in a map on the next slide, focus on land acquisition to address the growing population and those access gaps that we can see through our 10-minute walk analysis. And next slide, please. In this map, you'll see all the neighborhoods across Tacoma and the many projects from, really exciting infrastructure projects to playgrounds and playgrounds, pools, skate parks, community center design and construction, historic restoration, and one that I mentioned earlier, that little leaf with the dash line around it, is an acquisition project. So looking at new park spaces in prioritized areas of the city, where there are lots and lots of projects. I invite you to look at this map and really dive into the breadth and depth of projects across the districts. All right, next slide, please. The advisory committee also helped us shape the 5 key messages that we are communicating with the public about the different main categories of the bond. So connecting with nature and wildlife really speaks to the zoo and aquarium and Northwest Trek investments, and also within Point Defiance. Investing in your neighborhood, this is a really important one as we shape this bond, is that we want folks to be connected with their nearby neighborhood parks. Keeping your parks open and safe. This park bond, because we are not increasing taxes, is really maintaining what we have and expanding access and improving our system as it stands. So keeping all of those parks open, improving infrastructure, creating community gathering space. So looking at community centers and all of the spaces that community come together, and then enhancing sports and active lifestyle. So really leaning into the recreation and sports part of Parks Tacoma. So again, I do invite you to go on our website and learn more. And now I'll hand it over to Sarnisha to talk about one of my absolute favorite programs, the Community Schoolyards program.
Thank you, Erin. And you actually took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say the same thing, and that the Tacoma Community Schoolyards has been such an incredible program, an incredible partnership, and very excited to dive into the details. And so just to get you, let's take a step back, maybe 5-6 years ago. And so as part of the work that we do at the Trust for Public Land, a huge part of that work is data informed. And so we have a few tools that we use. On the screen, we have screenshots from one of those tools, and that's ParkServe. And so we're able to take a look at different cities across the country, but in this case, across Washington, to understand where there are large green space gaps, park access gaps. And so that's really where the work in Tacoma started, is that we have been working on park projects elsewhere in the state and recognized that there was a huge park access gap in the city and throughout the city of Tacoma. And so the screenshots here, you'll see on a further slide, but the screenshot that you see in the middle is the most up-to-date version of ParkServe, and within that, there are multiple layers that allow us to understand where there are large numbers of communities of color. We are able to look at income, health, and a few other climate-related data points. And then to the left, there's also some mapping from the city of Tacoma. And so I would say blending what we know as an organization and a nonprofit, some of the existing data within the city, we needed to ground truth a lot of this to understand and get a bit more clear about the needs for green space and opportunities to support that green space access. Next slide, please. And so, in addition to leaning into data, we spent some time building relationships throughout Tacoma, and we're very fortunate to start our relationship off with Parks Tacoma. And so, we partnered to create and update and provide two small park projects, one being Charlotte's Blueberry Park, that's also in South Tacoma and it's around the same community that Erin mentioned just a bit ago. And then on the east side of Tacoma, we were able to support the creation of this first Creek community space in partnership with, again, Parks Tacoma, but also students from the nearby middle school and community members living nearby. And so these early projects were really what helped to cement our work in Tacoma, but then also it started a great gateway to build on additional relationships that eventually led to our schoolyards work. Next slide, please. And so these early investments allowed us to build a relationship with Tacoma Public Schools. And through that, we decided on a 5 pilot school project. And within the presentation, I have 2 areas highlighted because I need to remember to share this information with you all. And so in terms of our work with the schoolyards, part of the reason we landed on this project, this program series of projects is that in Tacoma, and Erin touched on this, land acquisition is a bit more difficult than it is in other parts of the state. And so the best solution was to activate existing schoolyards, and that every community has a school. There is some level of green space that is generally accessible. So through this 5 school pilot process, we originally were looking at student data, but recognized that in about the 1,500 odd students that attend each of the 5 schools, that didn't fully cover all the students that are impacted by these projects. And then we learned that there are a number of students that are homeschooled that through this work had access to the green spaces in play areas after school and on the weekends. And then as in addition to some of the homeschool students, we noticed and also learned that many of the middle school and high schoolers are too cool to hang out in their own campuses. And so we'll often spend time in elementary school campuses after school. And so while we had a sense of the number of students that were being served, that didn't fully touch on the full depth and breadth of users. And from those students, and throughout our pilot project and process, we start in the classroom with students. And so they're able to inform the design. And then those students that don't necessarily attend the school help to really shape what we saw and what we wanted to build into the spaces. So we're fortunate throughout this work to again partner closely with Tacoma Public Schools as the landowner, Parks Tacoma, and a host of other partners that have continued to grow and evolve over the years, including the City of Tacoma and their Safe Routes to Schools program, a few faith-based groups that have been supporting each of the schools, all depending on the neighborhood. And we were able to see just a huge, just outcry of support and care and love from local community members and some grassroots organizations as they have been supporting our neighbors, whether they're folks who have been unhoused and or are in transitional spaces, and being able to watch them also provide that additional support and care to students was incredible. And then elevating neighbors, and that many of them love the spaces. They've either had students, little ones of their own attend the schools, and or they have students that have recently graduated and moved out. So for them, these schools and the ability to access the playground after school and on the weekend, which is a huge vision, just series of excitement as it relates to just access to green spaces, because that was something that we heard over and over again, is that folks just want the ability to go out, and whether that's walking the track early in the morning when students aren't there, or an ability to come back after school and just sit in the schoolyard on a bench and read. There was just a huge recognition that folks wanted spaces that were walkable, familiar to them, and also their families. And the last point, we have highlighted joint use agreements. And I would say this work has been successful in that both Parks Tacoma and Tacoma Public Schools have a joint use agreement that outline both maintenance responsibilities and just overall the relationship to have these spaces be open to the public, both again after school, the weekends. And that I would say was just a huge part of the work, and wanting to make clear that it takes partnerships, it takes creativity, it takes sometimes thinking, moving outside the box to create the spaces that community members want. And I'm so glad that we were able to figure that out in collaboration with one another. Next slide, please.
Great. Thanks, Hernisha. So our park access gap, which we've talked about earlier on, Trust for Public Land talked about, spurred this collaboration to renovate and open these 5 schoolyard parks for the communities that needed them most in Tacoma, primarily in Tacoma's east side and south end neighborhoods, where 1 in 3 residents did not have a park close to home. These 5 community schoolyards create equal park access for more than 40,000 people, which raises the number of Tacomans who live within a 10-minute walk from 69 to 88%. Our 5th and final schoolyard in our first 5 schoolyard program alone will serve over 4,500 people. So that's a little fun data for all of you. And Sarnish is going to talk about all of the other benefits that we found that support healthy lifestyles and expand access to important recreation facilities and green space.
And what I will share is that our Tacoma Community Schoolyards program has been the gift that keeps on giving, in that we're often able to increase the number of partners that we're working on, not only in the execution of the playgrounds, but also thinking through stewardship opportunities and programming once the schoolyards have been open or are available to members of the public and to our neighbors. So there's been ongoing partnership opportunities. I also wanted to elevate some of the uses we're seeing from community members. And so community members are using the spaces for cultural dance and practice. And then because of the partnership that we have with the city and Safe Routes to School program, a number of opportunities for students to receive their first bike through some programming. Students have gotten helmets and have been able to understand how to best fit helmets, and parents have been in the space to learn more about just getting their kids on a bike and some of the safety precautions as they're moving in and around the community. So in addition to bike safety, movement through the city, there's been programming, there's been informal activities happening in the space. Also want to elevate some of the health and climate benefits, and that one of our colleagues, actually the Trust for Public Land, our health director, as of yesterday, a new scientific, through a publication in a scientific journal, there's now research that is specific to our Tacoma schoolyards using the SOAP methodology. And from that research, the findings are really just understanding how these renovated schoolyards have been able to really support students in terms of their ability to recreate more. And another huge finding from that report was that from the schoolyards that have been fully renovated, we're seeing an increase in multi-generational groups in the space. So typically we think of just students and a handful of parents, but from the research, it's showing that we're seeing more families collectively spending time on the schoolyard together. And really excited that in addition to this health data, we have colleagues that through some of the GSI work and the addition of biosoils on the campus are seeing the shifts in how water's moving in and around the campus. So overall, between partnerships, health benefits, safety, climate, I would say our community schoolyards work has just been incredible. And one thing I'll leave you all with is that while it's helpful and it's been incredible for us to renovate the spaces and have students use them, it has been a great conversation point for neighbors, many of which are often looking for spaces to recreate, and for them having an opportunity to walk in the park and spend time with their neighbors who are, between 2 and 5 years old, and be a part of some of the school programming and be eyes on the space. And overall, just it's been incredible to watch neighbors show up for students in support of the school communities in ways that they were already doing, but seeing an uptick in that. And so thank you all for your time and for hearing us out as we talk a bit more about our partnership in Tacoma. And so I'm happy to pass it over to Alfonso and the team in Renton.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alfonso, and I am the Washington Parks for People Program Manager at Trust for Public Land. And I support our parks, trails, and schoolyards work across the state, but with a particular focus in South King County. And I have the pleasure of introducing Paul Hintz and Jessica Tarski with the City of Renton. And I just want to thank them both for spending time out of their busy day to talk about Legacy Square. We invited them to share a little bit more about Legacy Square with you all because it's a great case study for how we can push the boundaries of what parks and public spaces can look like. And so with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Paul and Jesse.
Good morning. Thank you, Alfonso. For those of you unfamiliar with Renton, we're located just southeast of Seattle, and our site is located in our downtown. Next slide, please. Historically, from at least the 70s, our site was the location of a sporting goods store. And because it fits in the narrative of city action in pursuit of creating public spaces, placemaking, and spurring economic development, I'll point out the car dealership in the first image that was purchased by the city in the late 90s to create a Piazza Park and what we call the Pavilion, which I'll show later. The site of Legacy Square was intended to be used for a new downtown library and was purchased by the city in 2011 and the building demolished in 2013. The library would have replaced our downtown library that straddles the Cedar River, but that idea received significant pushback from the community, so that library was renovated and is now a treasured asset. Once the decision to save our historic downtown library was made, the city presumed the site would be sold for redevelopment with residential or commercial retail space, but no serious inquiries were made by developers. In 2024, staff came up with the idea of creating a park, or really more of a public square, as a destination for World Cup watch parties, and then afterwards, as much needed outdoor event and recreational space in our downtown. At that time, we were approached by the Rave Foundation, which is the charitable arm of the Seattle Sounders and Seattle Reign football clubs. One of their missions is to help underserved communities establish mini pitches, or in our case, a futsal court, to encourage free play by children. Next slide, please. But staff's idea wasn't made on a whim. The idea of creating flexible public space that can accommodate events and attract daily visitors started with a planning effort that resulted in the Civic Corps Vision and Action Plan. The plan identified the area shown here as the central civic meeting space in our downtown and dubbed it the Heart Block. For over 20 years, the Pavilion, which is a former car dealership showroom, was an event space with a professional kitchen and catering business. The city is currently renovating Piazza Park, which hosts our farmers market, and renovating the Pavilion to become a year-round food market / food hall and continue to serve as an event space with regular programming. Behind the Pavilion is the Renton Transit Center, which is relocating to the crossroads of Rainier Avenue and Grady Way at the tip of State Route 167, just north of its junction with I-405. Once decommissioned, the city intends to surplus this property. In fact, there's an RFP currently posted for this property, so we can hopefully secure a partner well in advance of King County Metro vacating the space. Just to the north of that is our parking garage. The Civic Corps plan also recommended creating a festival street to the west of this block, and to the east there will be a stretch of the so-called Renton Connector that will provide a regional trail connection for the Lake to Sound Trail. Next slide, please. Given the short time frame and the hard sell of investing even more money into the Heart Block, city staff were able to quickly create basic renderings, design civil improvements, and even create a bid set for construction to save costs. Next slide, please. The site's focal point is a fully enclosed entertainment stage with an open lawn on the other side of a 12-foot access road, which will be painted with a mural and serve as a dance floor during music performances. We have areas planned for concession stands, mobile restrooms, and food trucks with sufficient power on site so generators won't be needed. Next slide, please. There will be a tree-shaded cafe seating area next to concessions or food trucks, a raised platform next to the futsal court, and a children's playground next to that. Next slide, please. We hired Methuen Architecture to design the entertainment stage, which will feature a full AV system, including a DV LED screen 26 feet wide and 15 feet tall, which will be used for viewing World Cup matches, movies in the park, and music performances during events. Our engineers also designed the site to have programmable lighting to deter unwanted activity at night and to enable us to highlight various events at the site or to celebrate cultural holidays. Or in the case of the picture shown here, taken by a coworker last February, celebrating the Seahawks Super Bowl victory. We expect construction to be complete by the end of April, and city-sponsored murals apply to the access road, the doors of the stage, and the wall of the abutting building. Next slide, please. I'll hand it off to Jesse.
Great. Thanks, Paul. So Legacy Square is a direct result of ongoing community engagement and input. As Paul mentioned, the active community space concept goes back to that Civic Core Vision and Action Plan from 2017. This extensive community-driven effort reimagined the heart of our downtown as a more connected and welcoming place. It was through extensive series, I should say, of stakeholder meetings, steering committees, public outreach events, and open houses. Residents shared a clear need for flexible gathering spaces, and specifically spaces that could support not just the big events, but everyday connections and activities. And Paul already touched on this, but the plan really truly focused on making downtown more walkable and more vibrant, strengthening those connections between civic, cultural, and commercial spaces, and creating places that reflect and serve the community. Legacy Square is a direct reflection of that vision and brings those ideas to life as a place for people to come together to connect and to build community. The Civic Core Vision and Action Plan included a robust implementation matrix that outlined the key projects, the responsible parties, and the timelines. However, much of that work was put on hold as we navigated the challenges of COVID. But fortunately, with the relationships built and the community input already gathered, momentum was there for the planning process that gave us a firm foundation on which to build and launch this Legacy Square project. So rather than starting over, the city was able to leverage that earlier engagement process and move directly into implementation when a fast-track opportunity emerged in 2024, driven in part by the World Cup and the strong interest from the partners. So with that groundwork in place, engagement for Legacy Square picked up where the Civic Core left off, building on the priorities and those ideas that had already been identified by the community. In August 2024, we hosted a public event to gather fresh input and feedback and specifically focused on how the space should be activated. Since then, there have been feedback portals that have remained open, giving anyone the opportunity to share ideas about how the space should be activated, what types of activities people would like to see, what kinds of programming would be meaningful, and what kind of environment the public wanted to create in the space. We've also conducted extensive one-on-one meetings with businesses in the district. This plan, as Paul showed, is right in the heart of our commercial business district, our downtown Main Street program, and also provided regular monthly meetings, co-working opportunities, many platforms for the public to come in, to drop in, receive updates, and ask questions and provide feedback about the project. The project page has since expanded from a portal for survey collection and has turned into a landing page for construction updates, calls for feedback, opportunities for artists, and ways for the community to get involved in shaping the activation plans, and just recently added a calendar of events that will be happening in the square this summer. Next slide, please. From the beginning, the partnerships have been essential in this project. As Paul mentioned, the Rave Foundation approached the city with the opportunity to partner on bringing a futsal court to life as part of their 26 by 26 initiative. If you're not familiar with this campaign, it started as a commitment by the Rave Foundation to create 26 small, accessible soccer fields across the region by the year 2026, and has since ballooned into 52 by 2026 as their courts continue to pop up across the state. When the Rave Foundation approached the city with the opportunity to put a court in the middle of our downtown, there was a real light bulb moment, and this was what sparked the vision of the square's ultimate layout and function. The existing downtown businesses have been critical partners in shaping the vision. The Renton Downtown Partnership, which is our local Main Street program, has been long focused on activating downtown. In fact, they actually used this site when it was nothing more than a gravel lot for events and programming. So there was already a strong interest in seeing the space evolve into something more permanent and intentional. As the project has evolved, a strong network of partners has come together to help make it a reality. Funding and support from organizations including the Port of Seattle, the Washington State Department of Commerce, and funding from the city's lodging tax program of partners have been critical in shaping the vision and ensuring the project reflects a broad range of community voices and goals. The reason so many partners have invested in this effort, and the reason our department, economic development, is involved, is that the project's strong connection is truly to economic development. Public spaces like Legacy Square play an important role in creating a third place, somewhere that isn't home or work, but a place where people want to gather and spend time. Research from Project for Public Spaces and the Urban Land Institute show that well-designed public spaces can increase nearby property values, attract investment, and support neighborhood revitalization. These spaces directly benefit small businesses and local entrepreneurs by increasing foot traffic and encouraging activity in the surrounding area. The Renton Farmers Market is a great example. This is an activity that is already illustrating the impact that regular activation can have on our downtown spaces. The market is held downtown now from June to September and has historically been located in the block just adjacent to this Legacy Square project. The market does bring thousands of visitors into the heart of our business district each week, and this consistent activity helps activate the area, increases visibility for local shops and restaurants, and drives additional revenue. Year-round activation emerges one of the most frequently identified priorities in that civic core vision and action plan, and the plan specifically called for exploring a permanent market as a way to sustain that throughout the year. Legacy Square builds on that concept by creating a flexible, permanent public space that brings people downtown year-round. So just like the farmers market, it's designed to draw people in, encourage them to stay longer, and connect with local businesses and programming. So through events, recreation, and everyday use, Legacy Square helps maintain and sustain that energy and economic benefit on a daily basis, not just seasonally. So from an economic standpoint, this is exactly why the project is of interest. Active, well-used spaces do strengthen our local business activity and help create a sense of place that attracts visitors and additional investments in the downtown. They also build familiarity and repeat visitation. So even if someone doesn't spend money on their first visit, they're more likely to return in the future. So as more people gather downtown, it creates momentum that benefits the entire district and contributes to a thriving community and a stable business ecosystem. For this project to better understand and demonstrate the impact, we will be tracking a few key metrics over time. That includes foot traffic and overall visitation to the space, attendance at events and programs, and how the square is being used throughout the year. We'll also look at economic indicators like activity in the surrounding business district, along with feedback from community members and visitors through surveys. We'll be paying close attention to tourism activity, partnership engagement, media coverage, and the variety of frequency of events happening in the space. The Legacy Square project is really about strengthening Renton's downtown, supporting local businesses, bringing in visitors, and creating a space that adds to the city's vibrancy and quality of life, all of which point back to economic development. Next slide. This summer's activation plan is designed to bring the space to life in a meaningful and coordinated way to help us navigate this crazy first year and the World Cup schedule. We have partnered with an experienced event management team. They have been tasked with creating a full year of programming that will include things like security and restrooms and facilitation, helping us create that template by which the community can then plug in future years. So our programming will kick off with opening day at the square and continue with more than 50 events between June and the end of September. That includes 15 World Cup watch parties, movie nights, live concerts, and 2 signature festivals, an art and wine event, followed by a closing harvest festival in September. So we are looking ahead. We're using this year to create that template for future activations, similar to what Sarnisha and Aaron already described in the Schoolyards program. We're hopeful that the square will become a space where the community not only gathers, but also hosts their own events and plays an active role in bringing that space to life on a regular basis. So we'll continue to seek communication and feedback from our community, which is why it's critical that we have partners like the Trust to help us continue those conversations. And we're so grateful to partner and bring the square and space to life.
Great. Thanks, Jesse. And I think I will wrap us up. If we can go to the next slide. So as you can see, so much incredible work has already gone into Legacy Square by Jesse, Paul, and so many others at the City of Renton and across their partner network. They built some real momentum, and it's exciting for us at Trust for Public Land to play our small role in this next phase of activation and public space improvements. I'll share a little bit more about that in just a moment, but I want to start off by sharing a little bit about why this project stood out to TPL, how it aligned with our work, and then I'll talk about what our support will look like at Legacy Square over the course of the next 3 years. So we were drawn to work at Legacy Square for a variety of reasons. I first got connected with Jessie last year, and she's been just amazing to work with. But just as important is, Legacy Square itself. There's just been so much creativity around the space, and it really expands on the idea of what public spaces can be. And we've just also been really impressed with the amount of community engagement and thoughtful design that's already gone into shaping the space. The Legacy Square is going to create a lot of room for art and active recreation and programming in a way that feels dynamic and community-centered. And this approach aligns really closely with TPL's own philosophy of creating creative placemaking, which we see as a process where we work with community members and use arts and culture to help shape public spaces so that they reflect the local identity, invite people in, and create opportunities for belonging. And so I want to illustrate that by sharing the example of the images that you see here on the slide. This is from a project in the Wenatchee Valley, Kiwanis Metau Park. There we helped lead a placemaking project to transform an underinvested park and help transform that space into a warm, inviting, and vibrant space and park for the predominantly low-income Latino residents. Through partnering with community members and local groups, we helped make the park feel more welcoming and connected people to it, connected more people to the park around it. So some of this work included adding welcome signage in Spanish. So you'll see here it says bienvenidos, and it's made in metal, but made to look like papel picado. There's murals of migratory birds with the words on this specific mural saying, these birds are immigrants. Every year they fly from Wenatchee to Mexico and beyond. And there was also cultural programming like ballet folklorico, as you see here. And so we, working on this project, led to the creation of a community group called the Parque Padrinos, who still continue to serve as an advocate for the community and an organizer for the space. And I think this is the kind of opportunity we see at Legacy Square. You know, maybe it won't look the exact same way, but there's a chance to help the community invest in these public spaces and feel that stronger sense of belonging and that ownership in those spaces. And so what our work will look like with Legacy Square moving forward is an activation, placemaking, and public space improvement project. And our goal is to build on the strong foundation that is already there to help ensure that, you know, Legacy Square becomes that lasting local treasure that it deserves to be. And so what that will look like is a $60,000 per year investment over the next 3 years. We've been able to fundraise that through a mix of private and public dollars. And our role specifically will be to help lead an annual community engagement process to gather input for public space enhancements and placemaking at Legacy Square. And the goal is for each year to implement one element based on the community feedback and input. And most of that funding that we've helped acquire will go directly towards paying towards those direct expenses of procurement and installation and construction costs. And just what's most exciting for us about this project is that it's not just about adding features. Going through that community engagement process will help shape this place to make sure that it reflects the people around it and gives the community even more reasons to gather, connect, and feel ownership over public space, over the public space. And so with that, that's the end of my piece here. So I think I'll pass it over to Erin, I believe.
Thanks, Alfonso. I think that wraps up our round of presentations here. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the screen, and we have a couple of minutes for Q&A. So I'll ask the panelists to turn their cameras back on and ask folks to submit any questions that you have in the Q&A box. There was one question that came in that Sam was able to answer in the chat, asking about how the Tacoma Park Equity Accelerator analysis responded to growth centers. So we already got a little bit of conversation going about that, which is great. But while we're waiting for some other questions to come in, one of the things that many of you touched on in your presentations were partnerships with other organizations. I know we already talked about that somewhat, but I'm curious, for people that are on this call, maybe working at a jurisdiction, and they're wondering how to find those partners. I'm curious what advice the panel might have for finding those people and organizations to partner with on this. Any thoughts?
I'm happy to jump in. And granted, at the Trust for Public Land, because we're in a nonprofit, recognize we have a bit more flexibility than some of our partners working at park departments. But what has generally worked for us is just go where the people are, and often, and I think about some of the work that we've been leaning into in Renton, and Alfonso can touch on that, often just showing up. And if there are community events, or even thinking the case of Legacy Square, knowing that that space will open soon, just spending time in spaces, whether they're tabling events, fairs, celebrations happening in and around community spaces, that is often, it's been a great gateway to not only meet partners that are either facilitating the event, tabling at the event, but often we've worked and bumped into new partners in spaces by virtue of just conversations had in and around tabling and activities. So I would say often it's easy to send the email, but I would say it's more difficult to find the opportunities, find the opportunities and have the conversations and keep the relationships going. Because often in those spaces, we're learning about all the incredible work that folks are leaning into and are wanting to start. And that's often where we've had the opportunity to get started.
Great. Thanks, Renisha. Anything else to add from the other panelists? If not, I do have a question also. We had a question in the chat, which Sam addressed, people asking about funding for maintenance. So if anyone has anything to add to that, feel free. I'm also curious for jurisdiction staff that might be on the call. Obviously, we heard about a lot of really great resources from TPL, and I'm curious, for that parks planner that's on the call, what are the first steps, or how would you recommend that people get plugged in with you and kind of learn about, obviously they've learned about a lot of resources here, but really start taking advantage of some of the things that TPL can offer?
I would visit the 10-Minute Walk website. I dropped a link in the chat to our website. We have our ongoing community of practice, which is something anyone can show up to anytime for free, very low threshold to participation. And then I would also generally encourage the parks planners on the call to check out our Park Serve tool if you haven't already. Many of you might be familiar with our Park Score tool, which ranks the 100 largest cities on the quality of their park system. But our Park Serve tool is a geospatial mapping tool that plots out park access and park gaps in the over 14,000 towns and cities across the country. And I think it's a really useful and productive resource that's available. We just did a webinar about it, which is also probably getting up on that community of practice page in the next couple of days.
Great. Thanks, Sam. We did just have a question come in that is asking about whether or not folks on the call are considering food production and agricultural opportunities as part of this thought. Erica, I know in PSRC's open space plan, we definitely think about farmland as part of the open space we're trying to preserve, but I'm curious if anybody would like to speak a little bit more about ways that food access and agricultural uses might be considered.
I can speak to that just a little bit. At Parks Tacoma, we've recently looked at an urban agriculture plan that looks at both where parks can incorporate more either community gardens and how we look at what we produce as a parks district within our system. So we're in our planning stage for how that applies, but that's a big area of focus that we're looking at across our district. So yeah, that's certainly on top of mind.
Thanks. I think the last question we have in the chat, Erin, this one also might be aimed at you because it's asking about Parks Tacoma. So when Sam, at the end of his presentation, he was mentioning the diversifying park experiences as a, potential, I believe it was when you were talking about metrics, maybe, Sam, of different ways that different experiences folks can access at park space. And this person was just curious if Parks Tacoma, is thinking about diversifying those types of experiences as well. I think you have a lot of diverse experiences in parks in Tacoma, so excited to hear.
Yes, yeah. As we talked about, there you have something that you're interested in, it's likely that you can find it in one of our parks or facilities. However, whenever we do a park improvement process through a design effort, we work with community members to talk through what they want to see in their park. So from our small scale playground improvement projects that can incorporate intergenerational play and exercise and recreation to our larger scale master planning park projects, we look at how to best address the growing needs of our uh, Tacoma residents and reflect that in our park planning processes. So that is at the core of what we do, is to try to expand and reflect our community and what they want to see in their park system.
Great. Thanks so much. All right, I think that, it's quick. I think that wraps up our Q&A time though. Really appreciate everybody coming on today to just share about a lot of the work that's going on in our region and beyond. So with that, I'm going to share my screen just one more time and we'll wrap this up. All right, so I did just want to end by reminding everybody about our next Toolbox session. Again, that will be taking place on June 26th, and I did put a link in the chat that will allow you to learn a little bit more and register for that. So looking forward to seeing all of you again in a couple of months. And then finally, here's some information about the AICP credit that's available for the session. At this time, I'll ask Michaela to go ahead and launch our end of session survey just to hear a little bit about how you thought today's session went and any thoughts you have. Once again, if you have any ideas for future sessions, you can always reach out to me. And I want to thank you all once again for joining us on this rainy Friday. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day. So with that, we'll go ahead and leave the stream up for a couple of minutes here so you have time to fill out your survey. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you all.